All right, before we write a single line of code, take a second and look at what's on the screen. You're seeing a full screen layout that fills the entire viewport with this deep, pure black background. No margins, no scroll, no distractions. And sitting on top of that black canvas is a subtle, perfectly aligned grid. Thin white lines run horizontally and vertically, forming clean, even squares across the whole screen. The grid isn't loud or flashy, it's slightly faded so it feels calm and professional instead of distracting. It adds structure and depth without stealing attention, and it's exactly the kind of background you'd expect in a modern dashboard, a tech landing page, or a high-end portfolio. Simple, precise, and very intentional. What makes this really powerful is how flexible it is. The grid scales smoothly with the screen size, stays perfectly aligned, and works beautifully as a foundation for any UI you want to layer on top. Text, cards, buttons, animations, whatever you want. And the best part, there are no images here, no SVGs, no heavy assets. This entire look is created using pure CSS. So in this video, I'm going to show you how to build this exact background from scratch, step by step. And once you understand it, you'll be able to reuse it in tons of real projects. All right, let's jump in and start building. But before that, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel for more creative contents. Let us begin by looking at the HTML structure of this page. Inside the body of the document, we have a single div element. This div uses a class called grid container. Think of this div as a wrapper that fills the entire page and holds the visual layout we are about to build. At this stage, the div is empty, which is totally fine. We are not adding text or other elements yet. Its purpose right now is to act as a container that we can style using CSS to create our visual effect. So for the HTML portion, that is all we need. A body element and one div that will take up the full screen and serve as our grid background. All right, everybody, now let us move into the CSS and start from the very top, going in order. First, we are selecting the body element. The height is set to 100 viewport height, which means the body will always match the full height of the browser window. We also set the margin to 0. This removes the default spacing that browsers apply around the body, so our layout can stretch edge to edge. Next, we select the grid container class. The width is set to 100% and the height is set to 100%. This allows the div to fully fill the body both horizontally and vertically. We then set the background to black using a hexadecimal value of 000000.00. At this point, the entire screen will appear black, giving us a clean base to build on before adding any grid lines or effects. All right, everybody, continuing down the CSS in order, we are still working inside the grid container rule. Next, we define a custom property called gap and set its value to 5em. This value will control the spacing between each grid line both horizontally and vertically. Then we define another custom property called line and set it to 1 pixel. This represents the thickness of each grid line that will appear in the background. After that, we define a custom property named color and give it a value of RGBA with red at 255, green at 255, blue at 255, and an alpha value of 0.2. This creates a semi-transparent white color that will be used for the grid lines. All right, everybody, continuing further down, we now get into the background image property for the grid container. The background image is made up of 2 linear gradients. The first linear gradient is set at -90 degrees. This gradient starts with transparent and stays transparent until it reaches the calculation of the gap minus the line value. Right after that point, the color switches to the custom color value at the calculation of gap minus line plus 1 pixel. That color then continues until it reaches the full gap value. This gradient is responsible for creating the vertical grid lines. The second linear gradient is set at 0 degrees. It follows the same pattern. It starts as transparent until the calculation of gap minus line, then switches to the same semi-transparent white color at gap minus line plus 1 pixel, and continues until it reaches the gap value. This gradient creates the horizontal grid lines. All right, everybody, wrapping this up, the last property we define for the grid container is the background size. The background size is set using the custom gap value for both the width and the height. This means each grid square repeats every 5em horizontally and every 5em vertically. Because both linear gradients share the same background size, they line up perfectly to form a consistent grid pattern across the entire container. The vertical and horizontal lines repeat evenly, creating a uniform grid effect that fills the full screen. At this point, all of the CSS is in place, and the grid container now displays a repeating grid pattern on a black background using custom properties and layered linear gradients. And that's for this tutorial video. If you liked it, please consider liking the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet. See you in the next tutorial. Have fun.